What's up, guys? It's nap time. Let's talk about books. My name's Tabitha. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. If you're not, welcome back. I think that this nap time is a little bit too tentative for me to be in front of my bookshelf for this, even though it would make more sense to be in front of my bookshelf. But we're going to hide in the office instead at my messy desk and talk about basically the last year or two I've changed the way that I consume books. My book buying philosophy is based on a couple of things. One is that I accept my inner goblin. I respect that sometimes you just want to buy a little book, Sometimes you just need to do a little outing and go get a book. And the outing is part of it. And the book you buy is not necessarily, because book buying is a separate hobby from book reading. I believe that fully. And so I used to have sort of this like hoarding mentality with books. And it's because I had this vision of myself as an English professor, having an office with a wall just like full of books and just having a million books and that I could lend to my students. And I loved that idea. And now I'm an English professor with an office, and I do have some books there. I have my all my books about writing, my books about teaching, my anthologies, and my like classics I keep at the office. But as far as, do I need to buy every single book just to have a million books? No, I don't. And so I realized I would just keep any book that I ever had, whether or not I was ever going to read it again or ever read it for the first time. I was always on a book buying van because I always had so many books. So the books I was owning were not necessarily books that I wanted to read. I realized for a while, like probably at least half of my books I hadn't read, and I wasn't super stoked to read them either, but they were on my TBR just because I owned them. So I was going into choosing what I wanted to read by obligation to try and make them worth the purchase, not because I wanted to read them. And I think that's why it sort of coincides that the times that I had a lot of books that I hadn't read was also times when I wasn't really reading. And so it's like, in the times that I'm not really reading, I would just be buying books just to buy a book. And I know that about myself, that I'm going to want to buy a book. But I knew I needed to like make some changes on the books that I was keeping and the books that I was bringing into my home. And so that was my first change, is I stopped buying books unless I was directly anticipating reading it immediately. And I didn't used to always have like a plan, like had like a loose TBR as far as like books I hadn't read, which was endless. But I didn't like think about, what am I going to read after this? What am I going to read next? And I just wasn't always reading a book. And that sort of changed again when I got back on Bookstagram, like last January, I think, is when I started more frequently. I was thinking about, what am I going to read? What am I going to read next? And that has become sort of part of the hobby. Not necessarily just buying the books and reading the books, but also, what do I want to read next? Like what kind of books do I want to read in this like time of the year? A big part of it, I'm sorry to say this, I really am. A big part of my book hoarding problem was book of the month. How many of you have been personally victimized by the books that you bought on book of the month that you didn't really want? Here's the thing. Book of the month is a great service for a certain type of reader. If you are somebody who is always reading books as soon as they're new, you'll love book of the month. If you are somebody that feels like you want to read, but you don't necessarily know what to read, you'll love book of the month. If you are somebody who reads a lot of romance or like mystery, like genre fiction, you'll love book of the month. I do read a fair amount of those, but it's not my like, it's not like my sole genre. It's not like every time I pick up a romance book, I'm happy with it. I have to be like kind of in the mood. And the thing is that I don't just read to be reading a book. And I mean that, like, some people I think are that way. Like, they want to always be reading a book. And so they'll read it really fast. They'll put it down. They'll pick up another one. That's part of the hobby for them, is always having a book that they are reading. They enjoy reading to read, right? I do, but I'm not going to read that book unless I want to read that book, unless I'm like excited to read it. And so for me, book of the month, for years, I paid for book of the month and got beautiful, beautiful hardcovers for a great deal. And so I do think it's a great deal. It's a good service. But the thing was, it just didn't go with why I buy books. And so I would be picking from a list of books that I typically had not heard of and probably would not reach for ordinarily, which is good. I think it's good to read books that you wouldn't necessarily find yourself grabbing. Um, but I'd be picking from the list, okay, which of these do I think I'd be the most excited by? There were almost never books that I was already excited by. So when they came in the mail, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to read that because I bought it. Not, I bought that because I want to read it. The times that Book of the Month did carry books that I really wanted to read. So if it was like an Emily Henry or like the Sally Rooney books they released that were highly anticipated, almost always they were add-ons, which is smart, Book of the Month, because then you have to buy a book. Like you have to buy a Book of the Month in order to get an add-on. So a lot of the books I bought were because I wanted a different book. And I did read that one, but I didn't read the one I bought. And so it got to where every month, almost always, I'm getting a book that I don't necessarily know anything about or like don't necessarily really want. Like every now and then I'd get one I really did. But very often these books were just books I was getting to get because I forgot to skip the month or because I wanted something else. And so I ended up with a lot of books that I just wasn't that interested in. And that's not to say I wouldn't have enjoyed them, but they weren't of interest to me. I don't need a recommendation. I don't need anybody to tell me what they're reading. I have a lifetime's worth of books that I want to read. That's not to say I don't enjoy recommendations from certain people. And I like reading. I'm starting to enjoy reading books that are like more popular just to be able to like share that with people. But I don't need the recommendation. There are books that I want to read. And so then when I was getting Book of the Month books, I'd be like, oh, well, I've already bought a book this month. So I feel like I can't buy a book at the bookstore. And to me, the outing of going to the bookstore, of searching for a book, that's part of the fun. That's part of the hobby, you know? Getting it online, a book that I didn't even really want, wasn't. And so I ended up with just like these massive amounts of books that were gorgeous, but I just didn't really want to read. And I wouldn't let myself get anything new that I did want to read. So when there were books I did want to read, I'd go to the library. I'd get them on like audio through Everand or, Libby or something. And now I have Kindle Unlimited as well. So there's so many other ways that I could read the books that I wanted to read that the books that I owned were like separate. Like I wasn't going to read them. And so I actually did sort of like an unhaul and I went through and I was like, okay, really think about this. Which of these books do you actually want to read? And I made a pretty good sized stack of books. Some of them that I had read, a lot of them that I hadn't, that I just really didn't feel the need to read. And I took them to Bookman's, which is a secondhand bookstore around here that I was able to sell them for store credit, um, and just get them off my shelves. So I've done that a few times now. I pretty regularly will get rid of books and take them to Bookman's, which feels more like it's easier to part with them knowing I might get like, a little money for it, especially money that's only going to be, I only ever get store credit. So I just get books I actually want from it. So that was the first part. I got rid of a lot of books just to kind of declutter my TBR that I was never going to read, to focus on the books that I really do want to read. So that was my first step. And then I made myself a couple of rules. I do not impulse buy books anymore. Impulse buying books was a big problem for me. If I saw a pretty cover and it was on sale, I'd just grab it. If I was at the store, I would not buy books I actually wanted because they were expensive, but then I'd spend money on books that were cheaper that I didn't know anything about that I wouldn't end up reading. And it was stupid, like a reading is one thing in life that brings me a lot of joy. I should just buy the book I want, right? Or find a way to read it. And a lot of times I do find a way to read it without buying it, but I don't want to own books unless I either know almost definitely I'm going to like this book, or I want to read it so badly that I'm willing to take that risk. It sounds so simple, but that alone made a big difference. But I know myself, my goblin self sometimes just wants to buy a book, right? I just want to buy a book. I don't have a reason. And so I also made a list of books I want to own, meaning books that I have read before that I want to own so that I can read them again or I can lend them to people, revisit in some way. Those are the books I want to actually be buying. So I have this ongoing list of books that I want to own, either because I want to read them or just to have. Books I've already read, especially books I borrowed from the library, books that I've listened to an audiobook that I'd like to be able to actually read on paper. And I have this list. And then I use that list when my little inner goblin is like, you want to buy a book? Okay, I can buy a book when I want to buy one if it's a book that I actually am either one, excited and going to read pretty immediately, or two, already know I want to buy it because I've either already read it or No, yeah, because I've already read it. And that makes a big difference to have that on hand so that when I'm just wandering around, I'm like, I feel like I want to go book shopping for a book that I already know I want. This is me. This is my phone. So on that list, I have like certain classics that I'm interested in. I have books that I had already read from like the library. I have a list of the Bridgerton novels that I do and do not own so that I'm not just like buying randomly. And actually having that list, I've been able to find a lot of them secondhand. Every Bridgerton book I own is secondhand. I got it from not even book bins. Like a lot of them I got from thrift stores. So having a list so you know what you're looking for, you actually start finding those books. So occasionally I'll be somewhere secondhand or like at the bookstore and I'll find one that I'm like interested in buying that I didn't know about ahead of time, but I want to read it immediately. And I feel more willing to do that because I'm not just randomly buying books. I'm buying strategically. And so I'm trying to like build this library of only books I love, or books that I'm going to read pretty immediately. I still have books in my bookshelf that I haven't read yet, that I'm not planning on reading immediately, but that I want to read soon. So I have a couple of past book of the month books. Darling Girl and Weyward are two that I haven't gotten rid of, but I haven't read them, and I'm going to read them at the end of this year. So I wanted to make a little bit more of a dent in my physical TBR. This year I've kind of been letting myself read whatever I want because I've really been in like a reading groove, and so I don't want to lose that. I think forcing yourself to read only books that you don't necessarily want to read is the fastest way to end up in a book slump. And I had a pretty severe one last year while I was pregnant, and I don't want to live that way again. So those are sort of my book buying philosophies. So those changes have helped a lot. And then if I read a book and it just was not doing it for me, I no longer feel any. I don't feel bad getting rid of them because somebody will read it. It's just not going to be me. And I think about, you know, that moment in Gilmore Girls when Rory freaks out because she's like, how am I ever going to read all these books? Like, I have that moment all the time. And so I'm not going to waste time reading books that I don't love. Like, honestly, I don't want to, this is not a hot take. I'm not criticizing it. Currently, I'm listening to Alchemised. I don't think that I need to read 900 more pages of it. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm sure it's wonderful. People are loving it. I just don't really want to read it right now. So I'm just not going to. I have it physically and then I also have it on Audible, and I think I'm going to return the physical copy. And if I want to revisit it later, I'll just listen to it. I'm not grasping so tight to my books anymore. It feels good. You know, you gotta be flexible and then you'll read more. So that's just a little bit about my book buying philosophy. I feel that it's easy to write off overconsumption when they're books because books are always worth buying. I 100% believe that. And a lot of times you need them in the most convenient form in order to absorb them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I try to be more mindful of not just buying books just to buy. Because I think the more options I have that I haven't read, the more like imprisoned by them I feel. Like I have to read those because I own them. And I don't want it to be that way anymore. I want to own them because I think I'm going to love them and I'm excited to read them. If it's not the newest thing anymore, I'm not as likely to read it. And so I'm trying to just focus on what am I actually not just interested in, but motivated to read. If I'm not motivated to read it yet, do I need to own it? Probably not. Maybe one day I will be. But I'm not buying books for the hope that one day I might be the right person to read this book. I'm buying books for me right now. Own as many books as you want to own. Don't listen to Marie Kondo. I think she said you can only own like 10 books or something. But I'm trying to not accumulate them at the same speed. And I think it's part of why I've been able to stay on this reading kick as long as I have been lately. So that's just my 2 cents that nobody asked for. I'd love to hear about your book buying philosophies. Are you somebody who hoards them for later, who just wants to buy them as like a trophy for your Kindle? Are you somebody who is just flying through those books? Maybe if I was flying through books, I wouldn't have this problem. I'm a very fast reader. I just don't give myself enough time. I'm currently in my like 1 chapter a night phase. It's not my favorite, but it's just where I am right now. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's what I wanted to talk about. So bye. I'll see you in a couple of weeks, maybe. Read some books. Maybe declutter your bookshelf. Maybe get rid of some books. It might feel good. And then make room so you can buy more, which is really the reason we do any of this, right? Yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you're still here, love you. Bye.